Now, beside Iraq and Syria, the largest presence of the so-called Islamic State and its affiliates is found on the African soil. That's Libya, the Sahel region, and Nigeria. Then there are also Al-Qaeda-linked groups in North Africa and Al-Shabaab in Somalia. For some insight into the security challenges Africa faces and how the U.S. can help, I spoke with J. Peter Pham, Vice President and Director, Africa Center, Atlantic Council.
We certainly have a challenge from Islamist terrorism in Africa. But beyond that, we also have significant security challenges within. South Sudan is a failed state. It's one where a country that began just a few years ago with all the hope and promise in the world is now on the verge of a genocide, and certainly already has surpassed the bar of ethnic cleansing, etc. How we bring that back from the brink. The so-called Democratic Republic of the Congo, where we have a president who has overstayed the terms of the Constitution, the black letter terms, and we forget at our own peril that the last time that country tipped into civil war, more than 5 million people died as a result. Do we want another African world war in the heart of the continent? So there are a number of security challenges. How can the U.S. help? First and foremost, by helping willing African partners stand up their own defenses, their own security, and then encouraging good governance throughout the continent, helping those who are willing to help themselves, helping regional groups that are willing to stand up in their region. We had a success recently with the ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, finally managing to persuade one of the longtime rulers to depart after he lost the election, Yahya Jammeh in the Gambia. Good riddance. Could have been done faster, whatever. That's a little bit of carping. It was done and without great violence. And so that's a success.
And actually, many Africans are looking at the kind of action taken by ECOWAS as something that perhaps could be replicated across the continent. But then you know that we don't have many regional powerful militaries, say in East Africa or Southern Africa, and that's why they look to the U.S. to say, can the U.S. help the regional bodies or even the African Union really to kind of achieve what ECOWAS has achieved in the Gambia?
I think that's an aspiration to work towards, but one that still has to be, we can't wait for that day to come. But until that day comes, I think the U.S. has to work with bilateral partners as it finds them and help them build up their capacity. Yes, the aspiration is an African Union-wide capacity, or at least a regional capacity, but outside ECOWAS in the West, we actually don't have that capacity in other regions. If you look at the other regional economic communities, the Arab Maghreb Union is moribund, if not defunct. The IGAD has its issues, although the East Africa community in the East has ECAS in the center of the continent is hamstrung by the issues around Democratic Republic of Congo and neighboring states. And of course, SADC in the South has its own issues. So it's going to take time. Until time is ready, we have to work on a bilateral basis.
And just going back a little bit to the issue of ISIS in relation also to their support of the other terrorist groups on the continent like Al-Shabaab and of course the one in West Africa, Boko Haram. Some have wondered whether the message from President Trump would be understood to mean that there's hope now for those regions, because he said ISIS and those kind of terrorists are going to be eliminated. Is there something that can change to ensure that these groups can be decimated from the continent of Africa, hopefully, and of course the rest of the world, that is different than what has been happening?
You know, it was very interesting. In 2011, I testified at the very first congressional hearing on Boko Haram. At that time, my view, which was that we're facing a major Islamist terrorist network that had ties to the international jihadism, was the distinctly minority view. It was rather telling that on the day before the Obama administration left office, several of the communications from Abu Bakr Shakal, then leader of Boko Haram, to actually Ayman al-Zawahiri standing in for Osama bin Laden were declassified. And so actually proving the point I made half a decade ago, that there were links, there was outreach, rather than the situation being ignored. So I think there's going to be greater sensibility and sensitivity to this challenge. And those who are willing partners in what is, as President Trump said, civilization's fight against this terror will hopefully get the aid that they need and deserve.
That's J. Peter Pham.